Got some significant names on the injury report. What is Kobe, Modest, and Lonzo's status?
Those three guys will be available tonight.
How is Montes? Just how is his
No
face
break.
doing? No break.
No break. We'll probably end up having to wear a mask. You know, I don't. If it's not broken, I'm assuming significant bruise but they did do X-rays and it wasn't broken.
How's Pat come out of all the rehab and the ramp up? And
Pretty good. I mean, I think that right now, obviously he's out today. I would say he's probably doubtful for the Philly game. But with the 4 days that we have and the practice there, the hope is that he'd be out there for all of that and we'd really start to ramp him up in the competitive stuff because we'll have time to do more 5-on-5 and that stuff. So nothing's been, he hasn't had any setbacks or anything else. He's still progressing. It's just more the ramp up. I think the one thing that would help him if they don't feel like the ramp up there's been enough time going into the Philly game, which I don't know if there will be. Certainly coming out of that 4-day stretch, the Charlotte game would be something I think they would look to target.
is he? I mean, we've asked you numerous times just about. It seemed like right before the injury there was again an upward tick from him. What do you expect when he gets back? And does it almost feel like, oh no, we're going to go back to ground zero? Or do you feel like he gets it, is what I'm trying to say? Do you feel like he finally gets what you guys are asking him to do and do it more consistently?
I think he does. My biggest concern with him, and it's not just him, I think it's any player that's dealing with a lower extremity injury. The fatigue, the conditioning, and where he's at in that. Now he's done everything that you can imagine to try to keep his conditioning up.
Right.
Like Lonzo, you're dealing with his knee, but really with the wrist issue, there was enough that we could do there to maintain pretty good conditioning for him. When we were trying to get everything quieted down with Patrick and his foot, he's going to lose. That's what I get concerned with, and I feel like he, to your point, is when he's been ticking that way. It's when he's really, I think, really well conditioned. And unfortunately for him, in some situations where, the wrist issue, the foot issue last year, when he has time that he's out, I think that's why they feel like the ramp up is so important, is to get his conditioning and endurance. Not that it was back before, but at least close enough to that. But I feel like he was, to your point, playing aggressive and finding spots to post up more. Not so much driving, but just picking spots in transition, picking spots on post-ups, like ducking in when he felt like he had a mismatch. Like some of those things on zone, I think were encouraging. So I think he understands. I do. I think after the amount of time he's had, I do feel that way. But I also feel like the execution of it's going to be really predicated on where he's at physically.
Well, you guys are on a stretch of 7 straight games shooting 50% or better. We talked to you about the ball movement and the assist numbers. Do you think that stat is a byproduct just of the good ball movement, or
what stat was that the case?
7 straight games of 50% shooting or better. It's a franchise record.
Yeah, I mean, I try to look at just some of the metrics, not in terms of the shooting, but one is our potential assist numbers have been really, really high.
Yeah.
I think they're in the top 5. The other part of that is we're probably in the top 5 in creating and generating uncontested threes, and I think that the more threes you take that are uncontested, the more likelihood you're going to have to shoot a better percentage. So I think we've been good in that area. I think the other part that's helped some of that has been the fact that we're like in the top 10 getting to the paint. Now, we haven't been great getting all the way to the rim finishing, but we have forced rotations and we've forced help and been able to kind of spray it out. So I think we've generated the right shots for ourselves, not to sit there and say out of a 48-minute game, every shot you love. But for the most part, we've done a really good job in that area. And then I think the other part of it, too, is the transition and trying to find opportunities to get easy baskets. But I think those metrics, when you look at shooting percentages, they're all kind of like related in some ways, right? Like just obvious, like uncontested shots, or you're going to shoot a higher percentage of those shots than you are contested, just the way it is. So, I think we can move the ball and play in transition and space correctly. I think we can generate good looks.
So this is a little bigger picture, but but with the Bears and Blackhawks making coaching changes in the last few weeks, you're the longest tenured coach in Chicago Bud. a long shot. Even the soccer teams have fired coaches in the last year. Just kind of, what were you aware of that, and what kind of perspective does that give you just on how hard it is sometimes to maintain these positions as a head coach through the volatility of a lot of those turnovers?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I have really enjoyed my time here. I really appreciate the organization. I'm very thankful for that part. I feel like from day one, there's been really good relationships with ownership, with the front office. I think the communication piece is really important. I think you hate to see, any situation where there's decisions like that having to be made. It's hard for me to say, hey, listen, what was the problems, the reasons, or why. But, it's challenging, all the way through. There's a lot of games, and, it's a highly competitive business. It's a results-oriented business. I get all that stuff. But the one thing I've tried to do is to try to communicate well, try to be, straight up and direct and honest as I can, try to help as much as I can. Obviously, I'm grateful, for the opportunity and the tenure. And like I said, there's people I know that have gone through that are really, really good coaches, but sometimes the timing of the situation is not as such that, that maybe shows itself, but it's just a byproduct of wherever maybe the organization is at that point in time.
Do you know any of the head coaches in Chicago very well, or like your schedules never allow that to overlap?
I feel terrible saying this. Who was the manager for the Cubs?
It was
David Ross.
Ross. So I've had several conversations with him because he played at Florida baseball. So I've had several conversations with him. Not really anybody else. And I think it's hard sometimes, right? Like the Blackhawks are playing now, we're playing, everybody's kind of involved in the thing. The Bears are playing when we're starting up training camp, and all that. We're in summer league, they're getting ready to have their training camp. It just, I think with the seasons sometimes get crossed over, it's hard to really get to know or spend a lot of time because everybody's kind of involved in their own stuff.
Don't you know DeRocha? No, I wanted to ask you about this particular thing. Some, not naming names, some injuries in the NBA, kind of questionable. Wembanyama yesterday was probably fraudulent, but there seems to be way more injuries than there ever has been. Certainly in your era when you played, you remember as many players out as there are now. And I was wondering, you mentioned how little time you have to practice, how training camp is so truncated. How much of that do you think that players, because they don't get to scrimmage as much, they don't get to practice as much, that when they do get into the high volume games, that they're more vulnerable to injury? Do you think there's anything to that?
I definitely think there's a lot to it. But I also think, too, is the age of AAU basketball for a lot of these guys, too, is a big part because they play an enormous amount of games, and sometimes they feel like they're playing too much. This is just being educated on this. There are like contact injuries that you cannot avoid. Like Modest gets cracked across the nose. Thank God it's not broken. Thank God he didn't need surgery. But if he needs surgery, for some reason, he's out on a contact injury. The things that you really have to look at, to me, are the soft tissue issues. Those are the hamstrings, the groins, the Achilles. Like those are the ones I think you really have to look at. And then there's times I think where guys can be running a little bit hot, where they have some real soreness there, or there's getting ready to start a problem there, and sometimes you see guys being held out because they understand if a guy's held out for maybe 3, 4, 5 days, they can get it resolved, but if it goes any further than that, it could be weeks, so I think there's management of that. I also think the other part of it too is just call it like it is the pace of the games is so much faster now, and the athleticism is, I think, continually gets better. But I think if you look at the pace of the game now compared to what it was, and it's a lot when you're dealing with the density of schedule that we've had to deal with, ever since they kind of came back in with the in-season tournament. It's for November, in January for us, December's pretty spread out, but January is going to be quite a bit like it was in November. So I think there's a lot of games. Sometimes people say that guys at a younger age are they overplay, with all the, I don't know what the answer is to that, because I know growing up, I spent all day long playing pickup ball all the time on concrete, but maybe really wasn't affected by that because the pace of the game, the speed of the game wasn't where it is today,
I asked you this a couple weeks ago about Josh's defense. Are you seeing improvement in it the last couple of weeks, or is this still a work in progress where you're going to need this practice time coming up to actually sit him down and work with him individually?
Yeah, I think for all of our guys as a coach, always going to elect more practice time, which is kind of the way it is. But I do see improvements. I do see growth. I think that the biggest thing for him is that he'll need to work on is, I think a lot of times when he is in space one-on-one, right, and he's got the ball contained, and all of a sudden now a screening action is coming towards him, a lot of times when he keeps that same distance from the ball handler and it doesn't get closed, that's when you see him trailing on pick and roll, getting hung up on pick and roll, and some of that. Now, there's been times where he's kind of up and then he's gotten beat off the dribble. So I think he's got to really, he's a smart, bright player. He's got to use his length. He's 6'8", and he's smart. So I think if he can understand the spacing at which, or how far away he needs to be from a defender to contest, put pressure. And then also, when he's in pick and roll, can he figure out ways to get under, over, without being back a little bit? And I don't really think it's always been, I think it's been a team problem too. I think
right.
Josh, we're talking about now, but I think team-wise it's been a challenge for all of us. And we definitely need practice on that because, I've talked about this. You talk about blow by, blow by, blow by. Well, instinctively, everybody's reaction, okay, well, blow by, I'm not going to blow by him. I'm going to back up. And the problem is you're a sitting duck to get screened.
Yeah.
So there's like that kind of like communication. And I think the other thing, trying to help our guys, we did it the other day, can we put them in a situation where there's this randomness there, where a guy is just in space and you don't know what's getting ready to happen, and the call comes or something, but they got to read and react and read it. I think one of the things that would help our guys, especially our younger guys, is seeing things before it happens. I think that was one of the reason why Alonso's a good defender, because he sees things happening. I think Crusoe is that way, and I think Josh can get that way as well. But I do see him, doing more defensively. I still think there's room for growth there. And not only Josh, but our whole team. Because we've had moments where I think the first 4 or 5 possessions of the game last night, it's offensive rebound. Like, we just got to have more consistency there on that stuff, and I do think practice has something to do with it too.